Boys, we've got a little bit of a surprising dev diary. I was expecting Paradox Tinto to just go on vacation since they have the whole vacation thing going on now and not do a dev diary. But they did. I guess it's just the Friday one that we're not getting. We are getting the Wednesday one. Now, Tinto Talks 25 is actually a very special one because it's a bit of an amalgamation of different features that we're going to be having in EU5, which kind of confirms what I said earlier, that EU5 is going to release with about 80% of EU4's feature on launch, and you're gonna see some of these features in this dev diary, like right over here, power projection. Ooh, which game has power projection, I wonder? Nobody knows now, do we? It's EU4. It's just admit, or come on, either call the freaking game project season or make the announcement already. I'm just kidding. I know that the announcement's gonna come at the end of the year and it's gonna be released next year mid-year. I freaking said it so many times. I'm still calling it. I'm 100% convinced. Announcement end of the year, release mid of next year if all goes according to plan, of course, and there's no setbacks. This is going to be a little bit of a shorter video, so pay close attention because there's some really vital things here. Johan says, today we delve into the mechanics of colonialism, another aspect of painting the map. So essentially we talk about how exactly you're going to be doing the whole colonization process. One important factor that has a big impact on colonialism is power projection. Each country has a power projection value. It is primarily to allow a country to be able to exploit those with a lower power projection. Power projection is very dependent on how advanced a country is, where each age has an advance that gives you 10 plus of it. It is also modified by societal values, rank of the country, and more. One important aspect is that the plus 10 advance from the age of traditions, the very first age, is in the advanced tree from the meritocracy. So meritocratic nations will be able, well, nations that have already the meritocratic institution will be able to get that. You do not gain power projection by doing specific actions like in EU4, but it's entirely based on your country's current setup. So essentially the way that they make power projection work in EU5 is the same as it was in Victoria 2, more or less. There was no power projection in Victoria 2, but there was a standard of living or life rating, I think it was called. This is going to be the same. Like when you get more power projection, you're going to be able to colonize more areas, I would assume, faster. Well, in Vicky 2, it restricted what areas you can colonize completely until you got a certain amount. I don't think they're going to restrict in here, but I think it's going to make it so that you cannot specifically colonize certain areas. I guess maybe it's exactly the same, isn't it? Oh my god, I just realized this is the life rating from Vicky 2. Now we see here the power projection of Sweden outward. I don't know what that is for. And then kingdom rank. So that's 6.5 power projection. Next up, colonial charters. So colonial charters work like this. You colonize by starting a colonial charter. So that's the first thing you do when you start colonizing. You assign a charter to a province for an upfront amount of gold. So you need to pay a certain amount. I don't know how much right now. I guess it's going to depend on the province. But then after you pay that amount, you're also going to have to pay the maintenance. Each month, some of the population will be moving from the homeland to the colonial charter until all locations that can be owned are owned by you. So say, for example, in a certain colonial area, you establish the colonial charter, but only half of those are you're able, for various reasons, like maybe the other half is already colonized by somebody else, or maybe you don't have the power projection to colonize those other areas, right? You will be able to colonize only a certain part of that particular province. Once that's done, it's yours as a regular province once the colonial charter reaches its full capacity. In almost all cases, there are people living in a location you want to colonize, so for you to be able to have a charter to flip to your ownership, there's new rules. A location needs to have at least 1,000 people there, like in EU4. Plus, there's a certain percentage of the population that needs to follow your state religion and be an accepted culture of your country. So that means it only becomes a province of yours the moment that a certain percentage of the population is Romanian or French or whatever the shit is your accepted culture, okay? Remember that accepted cultures can be multiple. You don't need to have only one accepted culture, or you can only have one accepted culture depending on your laws and some other various unique modifiers of some nations. This is the colonial progress screen here. So the colonial charter of Södra Österbotten, that is basically one colony that the Swedes are going to have in the Finnish area. And it looks like the location of Korksholm and Kopo are 100% colonized. However, the other locations are not. So there's a certain percentage for each individual location within a province before you get the whole province as your own directly controlled province and own. The percentage depends heavily on the difference in power projection of your country and the countries in the location. Yes, I said countries in plural, and next week you'll understand what we're talking about. That actually makes it a little bit interesting because, I mean, kind of obvious. It both implies that other countries that colonize there or have a claim there to colonize are going to have their own power projection, and as such, it's going to limit how much you can colonize compared to them. It also means that there's going to be a system of tribal nations like we have in EU4, and then said tribal nations are going to have their tribal land, and if these tribal nations have a higher power projection than you or close to the amount of power projection that you have, you're not going to be able to fully colonize all their provinces. It's what I'm assuming is the case, okay? Not a guarantee. This has the implication that at the start of the game, Yuan could in theory start colonizing Europe if it only had been closer and discovered. Interesting. How the countries and pops already present in a location react to your colonization is something that will be clarified in a later Tinto talk. So I'm assuming that there's going to be some hard barriers to prevent stuff like that from happening, but knowing how the usual Paradox release is, I do already expect people to do some crazy shit, like actually colonize Finland as Yuan. I totally expect that to happen. Maybe just do a snake through the Russian principalities straight to the Finnish lands. As long as you have a colonial charter, people from your owned locations will start moving to the locations in the colonial charter. Interesting. So the amount of people moving is rather low at the beginning of the game, but as there are advances, this will increase in later ages. Societal values have an impact on it, so does the distance to the colony. One thing to take into account is the colonization does not magically create new pops out of thin air, and being able to create a huge colonial empire is not as feasible strategy as low population countries. What this really means, guys, is that in EU5, whatever country you might be, as long as your primary culture or accepted culture, you have a lot of pops from that accepted culture, you're going to be the winner of the game. So that means that from the get-go, nations with a high amount of their main culture are going to have a huge advantage. So that means the Turks are going to have a huge advantage in Anatolia. The Greeks are going to have a huge one in the Balkans and in certain regards to Anatolia too. The French are going to have a massive advantage. Some Germanic culture groups, etc., are going to have a huge advantage compared to others. Obviously, Yuan is going to have one, but then again, I would assume that Yuan is going to be a bit more complicated with a lot more fragmented pop and a lot more different cultures compared to EU4. Monthly migration to Swedish colony of Södra Österbotten from colonial charter, colonial investment plus 20, and then outward, I would assume that's some societal value or something that gives 30%, as well as distance from Stockholm. Okay, so the higher the distance, the less amount of pops that you can actually send, I assume. Full speed ahead, only 40 months per location to get to 1,000 pops. Holy shit, that's gonna take a while. Colonial charters are not free, as I said, and moving people are definitely not free, and the countries need to support them. The higher the population in the targeted province, the more expensive it is to colonize. The distance also has an impact, but colonizing in the same area or region as your capital is significantly cheaper. You can almost always cut the cost to your charters, but that will also reduce the amount of pops moving every month. We have here the cost of a colony, population maintenance, as well as distance increases the cost, lowers the cost by same region. Okay, so that's not too expensive, at least for Södra Österbotten, but I would assume for provinces in the New World, it's going to be extremely expensive. Now, my question with this goes like this. Having these colonies is extremely expensive. What's the benefit? Obviously, you get the province itself, right? But what's the other benefit? Because just getting provinces, you can just go ahead and conquer other provinces if you have the means for it and you have the population to wage war. I would assume the main argument for this is some sort of aggressive expansion mechanic that obviously we're going to have in EU5. Otherwise, it's just the strong are just going to keep on getting stronger and the weak are going to keep on getting screwed up, right? There has to be an aggressive expansion mechanic. Colonial nations. When a colonial charter is finished and all possible locations in that province have become yours, you have multiple options for what you want to happen to that charter. If the province is close and you think you can get decent enough control over it, you may want to just keep the location as part of your home countries. You also have the option to have the province form a colonial nation or have it join an adjacent colonial nation. I'm gonna give my opinion on colonial nations after I finish reading everything, because this is really, really important in my opinion. Colonial nations are a subject type that cannot be annexed, keep that in mind, but has a few advantages and disadvantages depending on the point of view. And that whilst they start transferring less gold than a vassal would, they also grant some manpower and sailors, whilst also giving part of their merchants to the overlord. So it's exactly the same like EU4. Decline clarify, you can make colonial nations anywhere you want on the map where you can colonize. So here's my 2 cents on this, right? I feel like colonial nations are going to be shit. Why? Because it's copy paste from EU4. Oh, you get 10 provinces, you get an extra merchant. Cool. But colonial nations not being annexable is really bad, first off. And second off, if it's the same system like in EU4 with tariffs that you're getting from colonial nations, it's not worth it. Because even sure, you're going to get less control initially, but eventually once you have the technology, you will be able to build the buildings to increase your control in those provinces, and you're going to end up making significantly more than just having a colonial nation. Now, I'm just saying this if it's exactly the same system like EU4, which it kind of feels like it's going to be, okay? But if it's not the same system and colonial nations actually do give some proper amounts of income and have some purpose aside from just being one free merchant, then that's going to be amazing. I just don't know what exactly they're going to entail. This is just a very broad, generalized description of colonial nations, and from this description, I'm getting the vibe that it's copy-paste EU4. And let's face it, out of the many gripes some of us have with EU4, I think we all agree that colonial nations suck. That's why people change their capital to Bermuda to directly control stuff in the New World, because it's a dumb system that doesn't really reap in any sort of rewards in the long run. And by the end of the campaign, everybody in the New World rebels unless you're really, really strong, and then you're still going to struggle with supporting the colonies. If you feel that your charters or colonial nations are not growing enough, there's 2 tools you can use in the cabinet. Both of them become available from advances in the Age of Discovery. Okay, with supporting a colonial charter action, you will move pops from a province you decide, the province, and to the colonial charter you decide. So you could say, for example, move all the accepted pops from one province that you don't really want in that province. So say, I'll give you a really clear example, right? Let's say you're playing as Brandenburg and you have your main German pops, but you also have Sorbians, which are of course an accepted pop. You move all the Sorbians, you keep only the Germans in the German provinces. You get rid of the Sorbians from the old world, but you're gonna have to deal with some Sordian primary culture nations in the new world, which is gonna come with its own issues if those nations grow into massive conglomerates. So keep that in mind. The amount of pops getting moved depends on your current colonial migration capacity. So when you use it, you can almost about double the migration to a specific. With the support colonies, you can move 100 pops every month from a selected province to a target province in a colonial nation subject. This can be useful when you want to boost a colony and you have overpopulated provinces at home, or when you think your country would be in a better situation if you expelled some minority. I think this is going to be my new favorite button in EU5. Guaranteed. Restrictions on colonization. There's several ways in which you can block other nations from colonizing certain places, including diplomatic treaties. Oh, that is juicy. That I'm really happy to see. So you could prevent nations from colonizing certain areas by going to war and telling them, "You're not allowed. None for you." Or maybe just like the Treaty of Tordesillas, right? Where the Spaniards and the Portuguese are allowed to colonize from a certain area to a certain area, right? At the start of the game, Norland, Finland, Karelia, and Kola are under the claims of Sweden and Novgorod, who have divided the area between them. Exactly what I said in one of my early dev diaries when we first saw a sneak peek of the colonization mechanics and of the northern part. I did say exactly this, that there's going to be a system where Sweden and Norway get claims, and only Sweden and Norway are going to be able to colonize it. This also means that areas that have claims are not going to be colonizable by anybody else that do not have the claims. So it's the system that we have in Victoria 3, actually, for that matter. We also have the situation of the Treaty of Tordesillas, where the New World will be split amongst 2 major Catholic powers, causing a lot of interesting dynamics. I'm assuming that what this means is that all the Catholic nations will have to respect, but if you're not Catholic, you do not need to respect these claims of these nations. That's going to play into some really interesting mechanics, because the way it's in EU4 right now is pretty bad. Even if you're Catholic, you can still colonize provinces supposedly a part of the Portuguese or the Castilian claims because the Pope gave them that, right? But I'm assuming in EU5 you're not going to be able to do that, or there's going to be bigger debuffs if you do that and not just a minus on your freaking settlers and stuff. Next week we're going to talk about the differences between countries, why owning locations is not all there is to life. And here's a really interesting map of the Sami people in the north, Jarmian people to the east, Karelian, Savonian, Tavastians, and Kleptomanians. Very cool map. A lot of intrigue to be had. And I hope you guys enjoyed this dev diary. Love you all, and I'll see you in the next one.